Good evening, my name is Marko Dutka. I'm here tonight talking about a nighttime photography project that I've been working on for the past 2 years and that I'll be working on for the next 2 years, which will be exhibited at Bristol Cathedral in 2018. And what I've been doing, I've been photographing Commonwealth war graves, wall graves and war memorials throughout Bristol. But I've been trying to do it with a little bit of a different kind of approach because I've been photographing everything at night so that I can show the whole context of what actually happens around these graves and therefore show how we're not very distant from the people that are actually buried here and how what they did in various wars has actually shaped the way that we live today. I must stress that I started off the project, Arnos Vale Cemetery, where we are this evening, as a pilot project to see if it actually was something that would actually kind of expand into a larger project. And Arnos Vale Cemetery Trust, who run here, were absolutely fantastic because they let me have free access to the cemetery. Obviously I have to have insurance and I have to make sure that I'm obviously very respectful when I'm here. But it's a fantastic experience to come into somewhere like this when obviously nobody else is here. And I felt a real honour to be able to actually for somebody to let me actually do something like this. I must stress that we do get permission to do this, and everywhere I go I now have permission. I even have a police log number, so that if somebody saw us filming now and the police came over, we would actually be we'd have got perfect permission for it. There'd be no issues whatsoever. And it just makes me more comfortable about how I'm working. It makes the organisations that I work with actually more comfortable about the whole way that I go about things. So behind me here, we've got something called Soldiers' Corner. It's the main memorial to soldiers from the First World War in Arnos Vale Cemetery. I've actually got 2 different photographs of this. The first one was taken back in May 2014, and you'll notice in that picture that actually the ground that's in front of us here didn't have gravestones upon it. Now, Arnos Vale during the latter part of the 20th century became very neglected, and the actual original stones that were here were actually removed, and an awful lot of them were lost. However, they were rediscovered and laid back down again in 2015. So I have photographs of beforehand, when it was just grass, and afterwards with the old stones that were found that were replaced. This is actually a burial ground for almost 270 people. There are soldiers here from Canada, Australia, the UK, even South Africa. So there's actually a real kind of multinational, this is actually really a multinational kind of grave site for people. And it's actually, as I say, where the main ceremonies for Armistice Day and things like that actually happen. So what I'm now going to do is show you how I actually took some of the photographs here. I'm going to show you the kind of technical aspects of how I photographed it and talk about the way that I composed it so that I could get the most effective image. So what I'm doing at the moment is just getting the focus right. So we've gone into infrared mode now. It's to kind of make sure that you can see me, but we can save on batteries whilst actually filming here. What I'm doing is I'm photographing Soldiers' Corner. It's primarily lit by the roadside just behind us here. A lot of the trees have actually died back at the moment there's not lots of leaves on there, so we're getting lots of street lighting coming across. There's even a security light across the way there from a warehouse, and that's the majority of the light that's actually going on to the actual monument itself. We have got the moon just up behind us here, and it is throwing a little bit of light on there. So there's a little bit of mixed lighting. And what I'm trying to do now is photograph that and using just the ambient lighting and the actual street lighting itself. So I wanted to take a test photograph just to see how it actually worked. So I set my camera so it's at 100,000 ISO. So obviously incredibly sensitive light sensitivity on the camera itself. I've taken the photograph just to kind of check to see the composition is right, everything's in focus, that I'm happy with the whole look of it, and just to check the exposure really. Now I would love to be able to use a light meter. That's what I do for most of my actual work, is I always use a light meter. But obviously in these circumstances I simply haven't got a light meter that is sensitive enough to actually work out this kind of light in this low light ratios here. So what I'm doing is I'm using the back of the camera for that reason. I've taken the photograph, and what I've done primarily, composition wise, I wanted to show lots of leading lines going up to the actual Soldiers' Corner itself, and I want to show these gravestones that have been replaced here about a year ago, because they've actually got the names of the soldiers on there. And when I take the final pictures, you should be able to see those really clearly. So I'm trying to give an identity to the picture. It isn't just a lump of rocks. It isn't just gravestones. There are actually people buried here, and these have actually all got their own identity. So we've got a very low camera angle, which is helped by the fact the tripod is so flexible. I've got right low down, and we've given it a certain monumentality to the actual Soldiers' Corner itself, because that's part of what I want to kind of show in the actual images. What I've also done is, in terms of focusing, obviously it's very dark here. It would be impossible to focus on anything just using the autofocus. So what I've done is I've set it onto manual focus, and then I've got a torch here. And what I've done is I've put it on where the area that I want to focus on, which is this very first stone just in front of me here. When I put it on there, I'm not having to focus on the actual stone itself. I can actually focus on the light, which is actually really easy to do. Once I've done that, I can take the torch away, and then I know that I've got the focus in the right place. So I've taken my shot. I've worked out that 100,000 ISO. I've got the right composition. It's nicely in focus. It's exactly what I want. So all I'm going to do now is just going to reduce the light sensitivity of the camera so that I get a better quality image at the end of it. It's quite a straightforward process. It's at 100,000 now. We know that's at 10 seconds. So what I'm going to do now is drop it down. And every time I drop it down, I double the exposure time. So it's 100,000 is 10 seconds. 50,000 is 20 seconds. 25,000 is 40 seconds. 12.5 is 80. 640 is 160, 320 is 320, and if I go right down to 160, it's 640. If I divide that by 60, it's 10.5 minute exposure. So all I have to do now is just reset my timer to do exactly that. So it's 10 minutes, and all I'm going to do is bring this up to a little bit over 30 seconds. What I also tend to do is just give it a little bit of overexposure, because I'm not getting very bright highlights here. So what I want to do is I can risk having a little bit of overexposure, because it'll give me more detail in the shadow areas, and then if it is a little bit overexposed, I can always bring it back down afterwards on the computer. But it's just to give me that richness and detail in the shadow areas. Okay, so we set it all, and that is ready to go. So if I make sure everything's sorted, and all I have to do is press the button and stand around for 20 minutes. The reason I'm doing 20 minutes as well is because it will take 10.5 minutes to actually photograph it, and then another 10.5 for the camera to process it. So I've got to try and find my next photograph whilst this one is being processed. Okay, so we've been waiting here 20 odd minutes now. 10.5 minutes for it to actually take the photograph, 10.5 minutes for the camera to process it. This is the moment of truth. Now, most of the time, hopefully, we should actually have a great photograph. But if the moon's gone behind a cloud, or there's been any kind of variation in the lighting, or we've got a little bit of dew on the lens, then obviously we might not get the picture we want. So it's always a little bit of a kind of moment of revelation, this. And actually, sigh of relief, that is looking absolutely fantastic. So it's got lovely kind of moonlight on the actual stones themselves, but the monument in the background is getting the light from the street lights. It's giving it a lovely kind of orange glow, and there's lots of movement in the sky with the clouds kind of scudding across it, but it looks absolutely gorgeous. So really pleased about that. But there is that unpredictability with this nature of photography. And that actually makes it really exciting when you get fantastic photographs from it. Okay, so really happy with that picture. Obviously we'll make sure that it's absolutely perfect when we look at the computer. We can make any small adjustments to it. What I don't do with my pictures is do lots of Photoshop. I actually don't want to kind of put in anything in my pictures that isn't actually here. It's very important to me that I photograph what is here. I don't want to kind of surprise people. This is actually about the truth of these pictures. I want the integrity of the image to be non-compromised. So I'm pretty happy with that. I'm going to go on to our next set of photographs now. Okay, so this is a picture I've just done a test shot for, and this is a really good example of why your timing is absolutely crucial when you're actually taking pictures, because this one hasn't worked. We have the original one that I've taken, which we'll show you later on. The problem with this one is it actually is lit by a couple of light sources. Obviously you can see in the background here, the actual crematorium building is backlit, and it's giving me a lovely kind of orange glow. I've got quite a nice dark sky in the background. And this white light here is actually from the moon, which is just behind us over there. The unfortunate thing is we're actually too late for this particular picture, because although the moon is illuminating this area here, it's actually moved too far south, and now it's actually leaving this in a cast shadow. So we've got a very uneven picture. Now, I could fill this in Photoshop. I could actually put a little bit of fill-in flash in there, but that's not what I want from these images. I want the reality of what I'm actually photographing. Most importantly, I want to get the angles of the moon, the lighting right. So it is actually very much about getting your timing, about getting your preparation, about knowing your locations, about knowing your weather conditions, and just knowing the general environment to make sure that you get your pictures at the right time in the right way. So this shot now, you're looking out across Bristol behind you there, quite a way up above Bristol at the moment. And you can obviously see the Sailor's Corner itself. It's got really strong leading lines away here, so it gives you a really lovely composition. And I can drop my camera down, so it's actually quite low down here and quite close to the stones. With a lot of the pictures that I take as well, you get a lovely kind of glow in the background, and people always think that it actually must be a lovely sunset. In actual fact, most of the time it is actually the glow from Bristol itself, from all the street lighting. So I'm going to set up a picture just here, just to show you that. What we've also got as well is the moon is directly behind me at the moment, and if I'm quick, I'm going to be able to get a really nice image with the moon actually lighting these stones here. In about another 20 minutes or so, the moon will have moved too far over, and I won't be able to kind of use the moonlight to kind of show me the same kind of leading lines. Okay, so what I've been doing, I've been photographing very quick exposures just to kind of try and check on my composition. The problem I've got with a lot of these pictures is I can't actually see what my composition is because it is so dark. So I'm having to kind of use the screen of the camera to try and compose my image, and I've tried various kind of angles, different kind of heights, different kinds of setups, just until I get my perfect composition. Sometimes it can be quite a frustrating experience because you're taking 8, 9, 10 photographs just to get your composition right. Obviously you need to go through that to get it perfect, and then once you've actually got that, it's just a very quick focus check. Make sure there's no moisture on your camera lens, because at this time of year in particular it forms really quickly, and then you're then good to go. So I've got my composition right, I've done my focus check, I've worked out my exposure. All I'm going to do now is let the camera work away for 4.5 minutes. If you're going to do nighttime photography, any time but in the midsummer, make sure you have lots and lots of warm clothing, because it does get really difficult to work with. It's also something to bear in mind as well with your camera, because when it's cold, your camera's batteries will run down really, really quickly. So you need to make sure that you have lots of spare batteries for your camera, lots of spare batteries for any flashes or anything else that you're using, because they will run down very quickly if you're working in the cold. Okay, so really happy with this image. What's really nice about it, I can see the glow of Bristol just below us here, so it's giving a lovely kind of orange glow in the background, and we've got the moon just behind us here, so it's giving me a lovely kind of white highlight on the edges of the greys. I always find it difficult to try and make beautiful pictures about a subject area which is about kind of loss and about grief, but it's a way of making people look at these pictures again and again. If they are aesthetically pleasing, it will actually bring people back to seeing them again and to kind of involving themselves in them. This is a very, very beautiful place. People may find it strange to say that about a cemetery at night, but there's lots of wildlife here. It's a very beautiful place. It's quiet at the moment, and it's a real kind of honour to be here, to be able to do this kind of work. And it's the kind of thing that these people no longer share with us. And I think that that's actually adds a poignancy to the fact that these are, I hope, beautiful images. They are, as much as they are beautiful, they're also poignant because they're beautiful. If we're going to go on to another grave now, and what I'd like to do now is to show you how, because it's so dark here, I'm going to change the lighting setup. I'm going to actually use a little bit of fill-in flash to actually illuminate the grave itself, but also kind of mix it in with the ambient light that I've got here as well. So I'll give a more, a stronger, richer image because of that combination of ambient light and fill-in flash. So this is a Norwegian grave. You'll have to excuse my terrible pronunciation of Norwegian, but this is a gentleman who was only 21 years of age, and his name, and again I apologise for pronunciation, is Trygve Borgen. He was a Norwegian sailor, and he was killed in 1941. And there's a very interesting thing about this particular grave, and what really attracted me to it was the fact that obviously it is Norwegian, and there are in Bristol lots of different kind of nationalities buried here. So there are the ones, for example, like Australians, Canadians, obviously UK people buried here. But what you also get, Norwegians, I've seen Italian graves, I've seen a lot of German graves as well, Luftwaffe pilots. So part of this project is actually showing that diversity there, and trying to show that these situations, something like war, how much it affects so many people. This one is a particularly poignant grave. On the actual top of it, you've got the actual maritime symbol, and you can see below that for Norge, which is for Norway, 1939 to 45. So it obviously a Second World War grave. But just underneath the maritime symbol, you've got a phrase there. It says "Her Hevilja." Now, again, apologies if I'm pronouncing this improperly to any Norwegians out there, but that is actually really poignant. This is actually what really makes this subject matter so important. What that actually means is this is the family grave. Now, very obviously, this gentleman is a long way from home, but this is still, in Norway, considered to be his family grave. Therefore, he's still with his family, even if he physically isn't with them. Normally, you cannot actually get to this grave. Arnos Vale was very neglected in the 70s and 80s. So this normally isn't actually trimmed or mown at all. And it's very, very difficult to get through all this bracken, all these bushes and so on. There's lots of brambles, all sorts. It's only at this time of year when that dies back that you can get in as close as this. Otherwise, it would be almost impossible to get here. And just one of the other things that I find really interesting, just behind us here are all the houses that are built around Arnos Vale. We're right in the middle of the suburbs of Bristol. So we're only 50 yards away from where people are living. And I think, again, there's a tremendous poignancy about the fact that somebody who had lost their life so young, is buried so far from home, but is also buried very, very close to people who live their everyday lives, many of whom probably don't realise and understand the poignancy of this. Part of the project that I'm doing is to try and bring that out to people. Okay, so what I'm doing here, I'm going to be mixing the ambient light that we've got from a street light over there and some of the houses in the background here, and I'm going to be mixing it with fill-in flash. Now, the reason I'm doing that is because this particular gravestone is in pitch darkness. If I photograph this just with the ambient light alone from the street light and so on, then all I would get is a street light and just a black shape where the actual gravestone is, and it wouldn't tell you the story that is actually the really important part of this image here, and it wouldn't tell you about this person who is in this grave. So what I've done here, I've got a number of things that I've got to do to kind of get together that actual story and use the aesthetics of the picture to tell that story. The first thing, obviously, is I've got to work out the exposure that I need to get a good image from the street lighting, so that I can get a good, interesting background in terms of that without it being too overexposed. So I've started off by doing that with a 10-second exposure as we did beforehand at 100,000 ISO. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to drop it down So 50,000 is 20, 25 is 40, 1250 is 80, 640 is 160, and I'm going to go down to 320. So it's going to be about 5 minutes and 20 seconds. So I'm going to set that on here, and that will give me a great exposure for the background. But what I need to do now is actually work out an exposure so I can put a fill-in flash here. So what I'm now going to do is I'm going to use this flash here. I've got it on just on a little snoot. I don't want to illuminate the whole area because that will destroy the ambience of the image. I don't want to have lots and lots of flat light across the place. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to put a very small circle of light just onto the most important parts of the inscription on the stone. It will dance around the stone a little bit. I don't mind that because I want to kind of illuminate the surrounding area. But as I say, what I don't want to do is just kill the atmosphere, as it were, by having flat light. What I'm going to do now, I'm going to use the light meter. I said earlier on that we don't generally use light meters, but when I'm doing this, I want to get a really accurate exposure on the flash. I'm not going to guess that on the back of the camera. I'm going to work it out. As I say, I use a light meter a lot in daytime work. And I loved using these because I know they're always going to be accurate. So I've set up the actual flash itself on a snoot. It's pointing towards the grave. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to set this. My camera is set at 320. I'm going to adjust the ISO on here so that it is also 320. And I've set it so that it's actually flash. And I've got a little trigger here, one of the speed light triggers that Elinchrom have. So I'm going to put it right within that area there. And I'm going to take a meter reading. Okay, and it's f8, which is really lucky because my camera's set for f8. I can promise you that wasn't expected. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take a first picture just to see what that looks like. Sometimes I might experiment a little bit with this, and I might take it a half a stop or so above or half a stop below. But with this one, I'm going to take it exactly as we are and see what the result is. This is where you have to be patient because you never quite know what you're going to get until you've actually seen your picture. So I'll cut back to you in about 10 minutes time. So this picture here is actually a real one-off. The reason for it is because it's worked first time round. So very often I have to kind of take several pictures to get it absolutely perfect. And this time round, first attempt, and it's actually worked. So that saved me an awful lot of time and manipulation of the camera later on. This technique is called dragging the shutter, and it's used a lot when we photograph interiors. So basically you're using a fill-in flash to light your subject area, and then you're letting the camera, with a very long exposure, just let the kind of ambient light burning around you. Obviously in this case it's the ambient light from the street lights and from the house lights over there. As I say, worked first time round, really pleased with that one. The one thing I really wanted to kind of just really make a point about is that this started out as a personal project. Arnos Vale were fantastic. They let me do the actual pilot project here, and then once I got a body of work from it, I was able to take that round to people and to really build this project in terms of the way it was funded, in terms of the way it's developed, in terms of the way it's exhibited, and to actually put together a project that for me is actually really goes to the heart and soul of why I take photographs. I wanted it to create a body of work that is actually about something that I feel is very important, not just to me, but to our society as a whole. It's really interesting to be able to kind of do this work. It's really improved my photography in all kinds of ways. And it's actually enabled me to utilize a variety of aspects of photography and of lighting, of composition, that I had no idea that I would be able to use for these reasons. But it's actually, say, really expanded what I can do photographically and really expanded what I can do conceptually. It's really opened up a lot of my work to a lot of new audiences, and by the looks of things, it's actually going to continue to do that for quite some years to come. So if you have a great idea, this is why you should be doing personal projects, because A, to satisfy your soul, but B, because it will actually bring you to the attention of people who will be interested in your work. For me, it's been, if you can pardon the expression, a real eye-opener to do something like this. It's been incredibly satisfying, and I hope that the final exhibition will have a real impact and will hopefully make people think about the concepts and the ideas and society that they live within.